Okay, so God is dead, and we have killed him. One of the most famous quotes in the history of philosophy. Perhaps you have seen, like a bathroom stall or something. God is dead. Nietzsche. Nietzsche is dead. God. A very clever thing people think, I guess. So, by saying God is dead, here's what Nietzsche meant. Now, Nietzsche was an atheist. He didn't think God existed. And he did not mean that there literally was a being that was God that was literally murdered and literally no longer exists. Instead, here's what he means. We, again, think all the stuff that happened in the modern time period was just fantastic and just made everything so much better. But again, it comes with a price. We paid a lot. There was a high cost for what we got, and we need to evaluate what we actually lost. So with people like Galileo and Copernicus and Darwin and Isaac Newton and all of these people and advances in science in particular, we've gotten to a point in our society, and even back when Nietzsche was writing over 100 years ago, we'd gotten to a point in civilization where, again, we no longer look to the church for answers. We look to science. We look to technology. And Nietzsche's going to say, if we're really honest about it, and if we really truly are willing to have the intellectual courage and integrity to really look into this, we'll find that our real faith lies in science and technology. It doesn't lie in religion. Authentic belief in God is no longer possible because of how much society has changed, how much science has progressed, how much we are now focused on individualism, rationality, logic, evidence, all of these sorts of things, all these different perspectives. We are no longer the type of people, the type of society, as a human race, we can no longer just blindly believe something just because we're either afraid not to, or it's comfortable, or we always have. We live in way too much of a questioning society, a scientific and rational society, to be able to authentically do that. And Nietzsche thought that if people honestly looked within themselves and investigated their beliefs, they would find that their belief in God is superficial and that it's not authentic in the way that maybe it could have been for people 1,000 years ago or something. Now, Nietzsche was fully aware, if you read the whole parable in your book about the madman who runs into town screaming, God is dead, and we've killed him. If you read this sort of parable, you find out that Nietzsche was aware that he was ahead of his time. And that at the time, people were going to be very resistant to what he was saying and to deny that they really didn't authentically believe in God, that they weren't going to be able to give that up, that they were going to say, no, I completely believe in God, it's so important to me, Nietzsche was crazy, and I feel sorry for him for believing that there was no God, or whatever it is. So he knew he was too early, right? In the parable, the madman says, I come too early, the world's not ready, but eventually. Now, Nietzsche was overly optimistic about how quickly he thought humans would change. And he even has called himself the last philosopher because he thought that things were going to change so much after him, in part because of him, that humanity would be such a different species, that we would be as distinct from how people were then as humans then were from their, Cro-Magnon man or something like that. Now, obviously, things haven't changed as much as Nietzsche thought in as short of amount of time as Nietzsche thought. But if you do look at the world, there is a more growing trend toward people becoming atheists, and it is more acceptable. People are still maybe persecuted for being outwardly atheistic, but it's not like before when you would literally get murdered for it or exiled for it, at least not in a lot of places in the world. And there are a lot of countries in like Scandinavia where 98% of people identify as atheist. Now, maybe this has nothing to do with Nietzsche. Maybe it's a terrible thing to have happened. I'm not commenting on any of that. But a lot of the things that Nietzsche thought were going to happen have happened. There have been those trends. It's just maybe a little bit more slow moving and late to come than he expected it to be. So we got all this great stuff. We got science, we got democracy, we got all these fantastic things, technology beyond our wildest imaginations, completely worthless gadgets that we spend all of our time on. And what price did we pay for it? Well, we can no longer think that we're special, that God exists, that that's a real authentic place to put our faith, right? It's not anymore for us. It's not authentic. At least Nietzsche didn't think that it was. So that's what he meant, is that the power behind the idea of God has died. That God does not serve the same function for humanity that God had historically up until the modern time period. And Nietzsche was one of the first people that noticed science replacing religion, right? Which is something a lot of people point out nowadays. And heads up, the two, science and religion, are so much more compatible than people think they are. We don't have time to get into that here, but people feel like they have to choose, and I just think that that's ridiculous. So, Nietzsche thought that once people were honest and embraced nihilism, then that's when the tragic optimism part could come. So, once people do this, embrace nihilism, and then start to create their own meaning, this type of person is who Nietzsche called the overman, or at least that's the English translation, sometimes also translated as Superman. And this is what Nietzsche thought people needed to become. Now, it's important to note that Nietzsche was writing on the coattails of Darwin, and at the time they were just learning about things genetically being passed hereditarily, and stronger, more preferable traits surviving and weaker ones eventually dying off. And at the time it was not clear exactly what things were biological and passed down through heredity and what was just your own personality or your environment or upbringing or whatever. And the nature versus nurture thing is still up for debate. But Nietzsche kind of was under this impression that a lot of personality characteristics are passed down through evolution in this same way. So, like, very powerful parents would have very powerful children. Very lazy parents would have very lazy children. Now, that maybe could still happen even if it's just from environment and not genetics, but we certainly know that the type of people your parents are doesn't necessarily determine the type of human that you are going to become in the same way that it determines what your hair color and eye color and all that's going to be. So it's important to point that out. So the overman. Now, these are people who embrace nihilism and make the most out of the freedom and the opportunity. And they adhere to what he called master morality. And master morality is an ethical system that tells the overman to be dominant, aggressive, intelligent, selfish, to fight for what they want, and to just go for it by whatever means necessary. By contrast, we have the underman. And this is the majority of people. And these are the people that still cling to belief in God, that refuse to make their own path, that get all of their directions and beliefs from other people. Maybe it reminds you of Kierkegaard and the idea of being inauthentic if you get your beliefs from groups and institutions and you don't decide that for yourself. And the undermen adhere to slave morality. Now, they're not literal slaves in the sense of actually physical ownership of another human being, but we have the master-slave distinction here nonetheless. So slave morality comes from religion, Judaism and Christianity in particular. And so what happened was you had this big, back in the ancient world, before these religions really were widespread, before Christianity existed, you had more of a warrior mentality. You had this sort of survival of the fittest, strong, dominant, aggressive sort of thing, being violent, being actually praised in societies, right? Because that's what it took for them to be able to survive. So it's worth pointing out that none of us would be here if our ancestors weren't totally dominant and aggressive and selfish. We're not the descendants of the people who just expected others to take care of them, or the people who gave away all of their food and supplies and starved to death, right? There was a bloody competition for survival, and we're here because we're descendants from the winners of those battles. So then comes along Judaism and Christianity. And all of a sudden now, especially as we talked about, the Roman Empire is spreading Christianity. Now all of a sudden you have a morality system which tells people to be weak, to be obedient, to be generous, giving, sacrificing for others, to be humble, to be meek, right? All of these things. And so that's the slave morality that religion has given us. And now all of a sudden, if you are dominant and aggressive and strong and selfish, that's viewed as really negative things, right? And it's viewed as a good thing to sacrifice for other people. The meek will inherit the earth. Be obedient above all else, right? If somebody hits you, turn the other cheek, right? Let them hit you on the other side, right? That kind of morality system. And Nietzsche thought that this widespread slave morality completely derailed human evolution. And we were on this great path to be able to become great people and this great human society, human race. And then we got derailed. And now we praise weakness. We praise insecurity. We want people that have too much to give it all away to people who have nothing, right? And we're asked to constantly sacrifice what we want for the good of others. Now, if Nietzsche said anything negative about Jews, it was in this sense, that the morality that's attached to that religion made people weak. And it made us stop feeling like it's okay to make our own path, to do what we want, to be dominant, to be intelligent, to be proud and confident of that, all of those things. Now, Nietzsche wasn't saying go out and murder everybody that is an underman that follows slave morality. He thought that would work itself out through evolution anyways, because he thought the weak would just die off eventually. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I don't know. Maybe it's not weakness. It's up to you what you think about this sort of distinction. But Nietzsche thought we need to become the overman. We need to embrace master morality, and we need to create our own path. And this leads to amor fati, which is Latin, sort of at the end of this chapter, which literally means the love of fate. And we're not talking about fate in the way that James in Pragmatism was talking about fate. But this is the idea that there's something very liberating and exciting about the realization that everything is exactly what it is and exactly the way that it's supposed to be. And sort of embracing that sort of idea. So Nietzsche put out this call to people to have the intellectual courage and integrity to really be honest with themselves about where their faith lied, where their, true desires were, what they really believed and wanted out of life, and how to get it. I mean, there's a reason why the majority of people in positions of power, whether, CEOs or people in political power or whatever, there's a reason these people tend to be followers of master morality, right? Whether they know anything about Nietzsche or not. The really nice guy in the office who volunteers not to get a raise and who takes everybody else's work and never, makes a fuss or causes waves is going to be at that menial job his whole life, right? The people that claw over everybody to get to the top because that's what they want and they're getting it, those are the people that are going to be up there, right? I mean, there maybe are a few exceptions to this, but for the most part, that's the world we live in. Now, obviously a lot of us grew up with this slave morality mentality that we should be charitable and we should be helpful and we should be, giving of ourselves and things like that and for others. And you don't have to give that up. You don't have to agree with Nietzsche about any of this. But I do want you to maybe try to think outside the box of whatever worldview you already have and try to see exactly what he's saying. Because what he's saying here is look, the way society has progressed, this is where we have to go to survive.